Namaste. Welcome to this talk number 4, the series of talks on the Yogic view of the self. The speaker has been delivering this series of talks on the Yogic view of life for the past few days. And this is talk number 4, and it is about the mind. And in the earlier talk, that is talk number 3, which was delivered a couple of days ago and posted on this channel, the speaker distinguished elaborately between the brain and the mind. In fact, we are talking about what the self is, and we have raised with the fundamental question, what is self? And we started the discussion with the mind, the body, and we have understood that the body is not the self because it is perishable, its property is changing, and it is never constant, and one day it has to perish, and therefore it does not constitute what self is. In a similar way, we have also taken up the brain and distinguished it with the mind. The brain is real in the sense it dwells in the body, it is there in the skull, it is in the form of flesh. We may not see it with our naked eyes since it is located in the skull, but we can see it um, if it is somebody's brain displayed in the hospital or in the medical college, or we can see our own brain on the screen through a powerful electronic gadget, cameras, say in the operation theater. Our brain is also a part of this form, and therefore it is also grows, and it goes with the body. It also perishes. It also changes along with the body. And what is this brain? This brain is a, a functioning agency in the sense that it is here that the data carried by the sense organs is subjected to a process of change in the brain cells. And then a thought is produced, an idea is created. Therefore, brain should not be confused with the mind. The mind is a product of the brain. It is a processing agency. So the product is mind. The mind here is to be understood in the sense of a thought or a series of thoughts. So thought is a product. The process is what is known as the data being subjected to a kind of change in the brain cells. So this is the relation between the brain and the mind we have learned in our last talk. Let's examine the mind in this talk. What is this mind? The mind is subtle. It is invisible. Where it exists, we have already learned in the previous talk. It doesn't exist in the skull. It doesn't exist in the head in the skull, but it is there in each and every cell of uh, our body, because each and every cell transmits the data through the channels of nerves, and therefore the moment we come into contact with an object or an idea, the mind has already started getting itself present before it is taken to the brain cells where the thought is formed. That when we put it into practice, it becomes reality. So the mind exists not in the head, in the skull, but it is there in each and every cell. This is what we have learned in our previous talk, number 3. We shall examine the mind very elaborately in this talk. How can we understand this mind, this subtle, which is invisible? Does it really exist? When we use the word exist, when we say something that which exists, and that something which exists is in a particular form. Yes, body is a form. It exists, and it is tangible, and it is visible. But mind, does it exist? If it exists, then it must have a form, as we have just now learnt what we mean by the word exist within the quote. When we say something exists, something that which exists is in a solid form. But then mind doesn't have any solid form. It doesn't have any substance like the body. It doesn't have any kind of shape. Therefore, can we say the mind exists within the quote? Does it exist within the quote? Before we answer this question, let's examine how we can understand by the word mind. We have just now learned that mind doesn't exist in any particular form or shape. If this is the case, how can we understand the mind which does not exist in a particular shape and form? How we can relate it? Can we relate it to something else if it doesn't have a form and shape? Oh, we can understand the mind in relation to three aspects. And these three aspects make up what we call in English within the quote content. In Sanskrit, it is called the pratyaya. Content. Content means something that is there in in some not exactly in the form, but something that we can understand only in relation, not in its absolute sense. Only in its relative sense we can understand. It is in that relative sense the speaker is using the word content, not in any particular substance form. So what is this content? What is this pratyaya? As the speaker has just now said, this pratyaya, this content comprises three aspects, three things. What are they? The first one is samskaras. The second is vasanas. The third is karmas. Let's examine the samskaras. Samskara is a very complex word. It means in English the impressions, the impressions that we create and store them in this in the subconscious state. Now, when we come into contact with some object or things or ideas, we undergo some experience. And this experience, when it is recognized, it becomes strong. And this strong experience gets firmly rooted in our consciousness. Since in a day we meet with several things and objects, several people, several ideas, it's difficult to put all these experiences on the surface of the consciousness. So, therefore, all these experiences are pushed down to the bottom of the consciousness, the mind's consciousness. When the speaker is using the word consciousness, it should not be confused with the consciousness that we have already understood what exactly it is. When the baby, when it comes into this world, brings that, the speaker is not referring to that consciousness, which is the substratum of the whole creation, but mind's consciousness, right? So, in this level, as we come across, as we meet with several people, several ideas and things and objects, we undergo series of experiences. All these series of experiences cannot be put on the surface. They cannot float on the surface of mind's consciousness. So they are pushed as one is happening after the other. The one is pushed down, and the one that is happening now is there on the surface. Likewise, and this each experience which is down to the bottom of the consciousness, that bottom of the consciousness is what is known as subconsciousness. Sub means down, bottom. So they are pushed down, something like when we put some pieces of stones in a bowl of water. You see how each one goes down to the bottom and gets stored there, right? In a similar way, as we come across, as we undergo series of experiences in our consciousness, in our conscious state, in our wakeful state, all these experiences, which are experienced, are pushed down to the bottom of the mind's consciousness, and that state is called subconscious state, where all these experiences are stored. These stored experiences in the subconscious state are known as samskaras. In other words, they're all impressions. Impression of an object, impression of a thing, impression about an idea, impression about a particular individual, impression about particular ideology, impression about a particular political system or an institution, social institution, or anything else, or something that we read a book and we come across a beautiful experience of a thought in that book. So that also counts. That also becomes an impression. So impressions, I hope that the listeners understand it. So impressions are those readily responses. They are responses, immediate responses immediate responses to the objects and things, immediate responses to the ideas and thoughts. Such responses are pushed down, such responses are called impressions. And these impressions are known as samskaras, and these impressions are stored in the bottom level of the mind's consciousness, which is known as subconsciousness. Now, these impressions guide us constantly in our reactions. The speaker wants to make it very categorically that there is no action in the whole world. There is no action in human life. There is nothing that we can call as action within the code. There is only reaction. There is a stimulus and there is a response. That response is called reaction. That response is not called action, no. Because there is the presence of stimulus. There is a presence of an object. There is a presence of an idea. Without an object, without a thing, without an idea, there is no response. So the response is called reaction. Reaction to that object. It's not called action. Many of us mistake it for action, that we perform actions. We never perform actions. We only perform reactions. We give only reactions to the objects. We give our reactions to the world. We react to what we see, what we experience in the world. Unfortunately, these reactions are mistaken for actions. So there is nothing like action within the quote, in the speaker's opinion. So there are only reactions in human life. There are only reactions in the world. Now, all these reactions are there. These reactions are all called impressions, right? Stored in the subconscious state. And therefore, when we come to another object of experience, then we immediately react. And that reacting to that object, right? That response to that object is constantly prompted by the impression, which is already there in the subconscious state. We can never act spontaneously. There is nothing like spontaneous action. There is nothing like spontaneous reaction. Every reaction, every response, every piece of response is constantly guided by our impressions stored in the subconscious state. So these samskaras guide us, these samskaras prompt us as to how to respond to a situation, how to respond to a particular object or a thing or an idea. These, uh, these impressions also instruct us what we should do, what we should not do, how we should respond, how we should not respond. This is the function of the impression stored in the subconscious state. Therefore, our responses to the situations are not spontaneous, are not natural. There is nothing like natural action. There is nothing like a sudden action, a spontaneous action. No, absolutely not. Every response, every human response to a particular situation is constantly controlled and guided by our stored impressions in the subconscious state. So the speaker wants to make it very clear there are no actions which are real, right? There are no actions in the world, number one point. Number two is there are only reactions. And these reactions are not spontaneous, natural, sudden, and spontaneous. These reactions are constantly prompted by the impressions already stored in the subconscious state. So there is nothing like spontaneous action. These are the three aspects that we need to understand when we are examining this particular mind, which is in relation to the samskaras. The speaker hopes that the listeners understand what samskaras are. We are trying to analyze, examine what mind is. And in this particular talk, the speaker is making it very clear that mind is understood in relation to samskaras, pratyaya, the content. That content, one of the aspects of the content, yeah, one of the aspects of that content, that pratyaya is samskaras. And these samskaras are nothing but stored impressions in the subconscious state. And what is the function of these stored impressions? They constantly guide us, they constantly control our responses to the situations, various situations, right? There is nothing like a spontaneous reaction to any human situation in the whole world, in the entire world. So, in this talk, we have understood this particular aspect, the samskaras. So, samskaras at the end will determine what we are, right? These samskaras will also compose our character, what we are, right? What is our character? Our character is not formed spontaneously. We do not form our character, right, spontaneously, right? We do not get that our character within the code from any source outside, no. From any agency from outside, no. From any institution, no. But our character is formed by our own impressions. So the character comes from our impressions. The character is formed from by our impressions, because as we have just now learned the function of these impressions. The function of impression is to constantly guide our responses. They control our response, how we should respond to a human situation. Therefore, in course of time, these impressions will make up our character, what we are. Hope the listeners have understood the the nature of these samskaras. And samskaras in this talk, um, we have learned as one of the triple aspects of the content of the mind. We understand that there is nothing like mind in a particular shape and form, but mind we can understand in relation to its content. That is what is contained there, right? That is called content. So one aspect of the content is impressions we have examined in this talk. Let's examine the next two aspects of the content, the pratyaya of mind, in our next talks. Thank you very much for listening.